Good morning and welcome to Carolina Cares, an iHeartRadio production hailing from our flagship family of stations, WVOC AM and FM in Columbia, South Carolina. My name is Tyler Ryan, your host. So happy to have you here along the South Carolina Radio Network. It was on May 3rd, 1980, a 13-year-old girl named Carrie Lightner was killed by a hit-and-run drunk driver. This was in Fair Oaks, California. Now, the driver, by the way, also had previous DUI arrests, and he left the scene after hitting and killing Carrie. This life-changing incident is what led to Carrie's mother, Candy, to start Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MADD. I think we've all heard of MADD and what that stands for, what the mission of the organization is. Now, over the last nearly 40 years, MADD has become an international organization that is fighting the international problem of drunk driving. I do want to share a couple of numbers with you, which could be a bit eye-opening. Did you know that on average, the first time someone is arrested for DUI is not the first time they drove drunk? That is more likely about the 80th time they have been intoxicated or impaired behind the wheel, and they just haven't gotten caught, or they played the luck and nothing bad had happened. But this is not their first. It's upwards of the 80th time that this individual has driven when they shouldn't. It's every 51 minutes in this country someone is killed by a drunk driving incident or accident, and that equates to about 27 people a day. 27 people a day. It's important to remember, by the way, also that driving under the influence isn't just being drunk. It's not just driving while intoxicated. Language has changed. The view of what impairment truly is has changed dramatically since 1980. You think about this. There's other drugs. There's prescription drugs that you could legally be allowed to possess that are prescribed to you that still could end up in a DUI, driving under the influence accident and or arrest. I mean, think about this. If you're 21, you're allowed to have beer, right? It's kind of the same thing. The other thing to keep in mind is that how drunk you are is a simple biological equation. It's the amount of alcohol over a period of time. You know, the excuse, well, I haven't had much to drink today, or I haven't had much to eat today, or whatever. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. We'll get back into that in a few minutes. But, drinking coffee, eating, taking a cold shower, these are all wives' tales. There's no way to accelerate being sober. It's a matter of alcohol over time. It's in your blood. It's chemical. It's biological. Now, as I mentioned, impaired driving is not just an us problem. It's not just here in America. It's across the globe. Wherever you find vehicles, or for that matter, even bicycles, this is an issue. Today, Mothers Against Drunk Driving has a footprint in every state, including, of course, South Carolina, North Carolina. And each year, they bring opportunities to educate, enlighten, and yes, even legislate for the mission. Joining me from MADD South and North Carolina, the executive director, and I want to make sure you get your title right. You're the regional executive director for MADD North and South Carolina. We'll fix that in a minute. Steven Burritt, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Not too bad. So, that's some staggering facts, and that's just a couple of them. Staggering facts about drunk driving, and I say, and I just did it, impaired driving. Because that's really what we think of, right? We think of drinking. We don't think about marijuana or drugs or anything else. We think of people going out, having some liquor drinks and getting behind the wheel.
Sure. They all can have the same devastating effects on families. Anything that chemically impairs your ability to drive is a danger and something that we care deeply about. We certainly serve victims who have experienced that sort of crime in all those different forms that you mentioned.
Let's talk a little bit about MADD. I mentioned the wide view, May 3rd, 1980, when Carrie was killed. Let's kind of go back to that, and I guess that obviously becomes Candy, her mom. It becomes her mission because her little girl's gone. I mean, I can see that. That's what do you have left when a parent loses a child, except you have one laser-focused mission, right?
That's right. Really, as grassroots can be, it truly was. Starting with that one woman who, you mentioned about that person having previous offenses. That person actually never even served any time because of that. And so obviously the outrage and the violation was on so many levels, and she spoke out, and, turned out there's so many people out there that had similar stories. And so, I mean, as much as we get outraged sometimes about, the penalties for DUI, and particularly for the serious crashes, how how low the penalty is sometimes. It was even worse back then in 1980. And so there were a lot of people with these stories of feeling like something needed to be different. I'll even mention, when the organization was originally formed, it was called Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, because obviously there was that anger being mad. About 85, they changed it to Mothers Against Drunk Driving in recognition that we're not against the individuals per se. We're against the action. When people don't make that choice, we have no issue. But it got to the point where in the late 80s, early 90s, MADD was kind of the number one charity in America. Those stories just really touched people's hearts and realizing how tragic and preventable it all was. And 41 years later, we're still definitely working on the mission. Sure. And if you take the long view, the gains have been amazing. Again, even though, unfortunately, there's still more than 10,000 people a year in this country who die of drunk driving. It was more like 22,000 back then. So sure. It's really considered one of the larger successes in behavior change kind of health problems. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, we've plateaued a lot, both nationwide and in the state over the closer to the past decade. So we're ready to get back to seeing those numbers come down again. Right.
And if you think about it, we all watched the old movies. Heck, even Andy Taylor, the Andy Griffith Show, Otis used to drive himself to the jail and lock himself up, and that was a joke. It was kind of like, it just wasn't it was kind of one of those things that people would just have too much to drink and get behind the wheel. So it really was 1980 really that put it in the spotlight, I would think. Because, up until then, it was against the law, and yes, you got in trouble. But more often than not, you would just get a ride home. You wouldn't necessarily go to jail. You wouldn't necessarily lose your license. Things have just changed dramatically because of MADD over the last 41 years. Would that be fair? We all remember those movies and shows, right?
That's right. No, yeah. For me, the childhood show that I kind of think of, Hee Haw, for some reason, that's what I think of as the joke being the town drunk behind the wheel and things like that. You're right. But you're right. No, when we talk about MADD's impact over 41 years, certainly we can point to the thousands of state and federal and local laws that have been changed, changing the blood alcohol content from what most states was 0.10 to 0.08, or getting the 21 drinking age passed. Those are kind of like the real signpost things that move the mission. But usually if people are depicting the history correctly, they also add what you're talking about. It's just a shift in the public sentiment as, mostly MADD, but certainly other places as well. We started to put the faces and the names and the stories behind these people so that they weren't just statistics, and people really started to empathize and realize it could be anybody. Drunk driving, everyone thinks drunk driving is not going to affect them until it does. And sometimes when it does, it's typically often going to be the worst thing that's ever going to happen in your life, to be injured or have someone in your family killed. So really those stories and just changing public perception over time. Hopefully we've gotten to the place where, if you heard your best friend said he, drove home drunk from the bar last night, hopefully you'd be more willing to smack him in the head than laugh about it. And I think, that shift, while still more progress to go, has come a long, long way. And I think, and that, of course, has been able to help us change those laws as people have realized how unacceptable and tragic it can be.
And maybe I'm wrong, but I seem to remember, I'm from New England, that originally it was when I first started learning about, driving, I've been driving a minute now. I want to say that intoxicated level for illegal for drunk driving essentially was 1.5 initially. And then it started to come down to a 1.0, and then now I think all 50 states at this point are an 0.8, I believe. Is that you'd be better served? We've actually got
Utah at 0.05, so there's one outlier is Utah that actually, and that was just at the start of 2019, I believe. So it's still relatively recent. And for the most, the blood alcohol content still technically is a state choice, and so there was definitely a patchwork of BACs across the country. But when we talk about going to 0.08. Technically, each state could still make its own decision. You just were going to lose a whole bunch of your highway money if you didn't. And of course, South Carolina was one of the last states that kind of went along with that when it got down to that final minute of not losing highway funds. So that definitely brought everybody to 0.08. We're 49 out of 50. It's 0.08 now.
Sure, and I know that those funds, when you hear about the checkpoints and things like that, that's federal money. I'm sure state money as well. Where you've got those checkpoints, where you've got officers lined up, and they basically just kind of funnel every car that comes through. Hey, you got your license, your registration, your insurance, and have you had anything to drink tonight? And that's a lot of those are extra duties.
I love to talk about checkpoints because they are so important. And nobody loves going through a checkpoint. Even a sober person doesn't love going through a checkpoint. There's always that minute of tension every time the officer's right there at your window. But without a doubt, the research is clear. Communities that do regular checkpoint programs can have DUI fatalities reduced by as much as 20%. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about catching the drunk driver in the moment, although certainly you can catch a lot of checkpoints. It's really about, when people see one, they tell someone else and they realize, man, if I had been drinking, I'd be, they'd have me right now behind bars. So it sends that message like this is not a community where I better do that because I never know where that checkpoint's going to be. So they're very effective. And actually, when you kind of hear about, the word being spread or people putting it on Facebook, it's not an entirely bad thing. It's, while maybe somebody goes on a secondary road and gets around it that night, still plants that seed that this could happen at any time.
Right.
And fortunately, most people know the penalties for a DUI are pretty severe, or at least pretty costly. Unfortunately, it still doesn't change enough people's behavior. But it does, when people know that risk of getting caught is out there, it changes things.
And, I can tell you firsthand from working those, those checkpoints when I was full-time in law enforcement, we move around. We might do one for an hour on one road. And then to your point is, you hear it goes around social media. Hey, the guys are out on Sunset Boulevard. Okay. Well, guess what? We're not stupid. We move. You move down the road, and there is that hopefully that potential concern for getting caught. And I hate to govern by fear, but in some cases, the fear of the penalties, I would like to think are enough to make you say, "Hey, man, I can just call Uber." My goodness, I mean, there's not really even an excuse anymore to drive drunk. I mean, I get back in the day before Uber, if you didn't have a friend or a taxi. And I'm not condoning it, but I'm saying, okay, that choice is a little different. But now you on your phone, here, pick me up, bring me home. Let me save my life and save $10,000 and save someone else's life for, a $30 ride home. That's a deal.
Absolutely. Never been easier to get a safe ride home.
And I know. In fact, there's several tow companies. Schroeder Towing, Chris Schroeder. You see his signs everywhere. But I know a lot of companies are doing this. That for $50. They'll tell you, of course, the argument, well, I have to come down and get my car tomorrow morning. Okay. So for $50, there are tow companies that'll come tow you home. And so then you wake up and your car's in your front yard. There is no excuse for it. There just isn't, Steven.
That's right. It's never been easier, never been smarter. And again, as you well said, the risks of either getting caught or even worse, doing something to yourself or somebody else should be all the motivation it takes. So we'll keep it trying to attack it from every angle, give people as many reasons to make those good decisions as we can.
And I'm not a doctor, and I don't want to necessarily get into the biology of alcohol and I say drugs too. I we're out focusing on alcohol, but I mean, remember, impairment is anything. It's illegal drugs. It's drugs you're prescribed that you shouldn't. Most prescriptions, if you shouldn't drive, it'll say, do not operate a motor vehicle. That would be a good tip to not pop a couple of pills and run down to Walmart. That would be, here's your sign. But essentially, of course, everyone says, well, I'm drunk because I didn't have much to eat. The way alcohol works, if you don't know, is, again, it's a chemical reaction. You're introducing it into your system. You are going to be as drunk as you're going. Now, if you haven't eaten anything, you might get drunker faster. But if you're ultimately going to drink enough where you are at a, say, 1.5, that's where your body's going to go, and it takes time to process that back out through the liver. Taking a cold shoulder or doing 10 jumping jacks does not accelerate the sobering process, unless I'm missing something.
No, you're exactly right, and that's why it's so important to not try to dance that line of am I good, am I not good. One drink even, have a plan. Just if your plans are going to include any of those types of substances, just have a plan in advance, because make those decisions, those plans while you're sober, because once people get intoxicated, but obviously the decision-making process is greatly impaired, as is the driving. So if they just plan ahead, you take all that guesswork out, and as you said, it's never been easier. One of
the frustrations I always had coming from another state, I've done law enforcement for my life, and one of the frustrations I had coming to South Carolina is there seems to be a lot more hoops that officers have to jump through to secure a DUI conviction than, say, I did in Vermont. And I haven't practiced law enforcement in Vermont, full disclosure, in 18 years, so I don't know how that's changed. But I know when I moved here, the day off the boat, so to speak, the day I got off the interstate and took my first police job in South Carolina, I found the laws here to be challenging in order to secure a DUI conviction. Do you find that still to be the case? And what do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. It's the DUI statute in our state is 28 pages long. It's incredibly complex, overly complicated, and frankly just puts way more burden on the enforcement and prosecution than other states do. I mean, there's probably in every state it's a little challenging to get a DUI conviction, but some of the things we do in South Carolina, and the most glaring one is our dash cam statute, which anyone who's in the business doesn't need to have explained. But for the rest of the world, basically from the time an officer puts on their blue lights to pull someone over to the time they put him in the back of the car after deciding they're going to arrest him for DUI, that dash cam video has to be running the whole time. And in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. We're for dash cam cameras in many other states. That's certainly part of the evidence they put forward is what they record on the dash cam. The problem is in South Carolina, our standards for what is a perfect video are incredibly high. And if it's not a perfect video, for any reason the judge determines it to be an insufficient video, and the video gets tossed out, basically the way our statute is written is your DUI is gone. So, right. As I say, somebody could be swerving in the roadway, blurred, smell like alcohol, slurred speech. They could admit to drinking 9 beers. They could blow a .16 into the machine. They could throw up on the officer's shoes. If something goes wrong with that video, including just a mechanical or an audio glitch that couldn't be controlled or prevented, that person almost certainly is not going to get convicted of DUI. And that's crazy. It's obviously doesn't make sense. It's harmful to public safety. And again, in other states, they would be able to put all that other evidence forward. In our state, we start with saying, what's the quality of your video? If it doesn't work, it's got to go. And of course, you could have mechanical errors. You could have weather. You could have glare, shadows. Of course, the officers outside of the car doing these tests, they don't have a perfect view of what the camera is getting and not getting. So something could be obstructed. They don't even realize until they get back and look at the video later. And by then, it's too late. So that really is probably the number one reason we have such an issue. There's a bunch of others. For those who are really interested in this subject in particular about, how it's so difficult, at our website, madd.org/SC, madd.org/SC, right up at the top, you can click a button to download what we call our court monitoring report. So we have a project where in 7 of the larger counties across the state, we have a staff and sometimes volunteers are tracking the outcome of regular first offense DUI cases and then putting it out to the public exactly what's happening with these cases. And as our 2020 report that we released in December showed, that for 6 of the 7 counties where we're monitoring, not even 50% of the people arrested got convicted of DUI.
That's crazy.
And we might be the first to say that every single person arrested perhaps should not be found guilty. But I don't think you'll find anybody that believes that less than half the people who are arrested for DUI were not actually too impaired to operate their vehicle safely. In some counties, it was 30%. It doesn't speak to bad arrests. It speaks to unnecessary complications, inadequate prosecution resources. And until we start really starting to care about that, we're not truly holding people accountable to what is a crime.
Right. And you said it a minute ago, the video should be part of the evidence. And you're right. It's please don't misunderstand. This is no indictment on law enforcement in any way, shape, or form. Speaking as a police officer, I understand what you're saying. It's not that the arrest is bad. It's not that the officer didn't have probable cause. It's not that he didn't make a good arrest. It comes down to that video, which should only be a part. Because when you're looking at any case, but certainly a DUI case, you're building a house. An officer, you're driving on the road, an officer behind you, you swerve, you cross over the yellow line a couple of times. You have what's called significant drift. Maybe you're bouncing white line to yellow line. Okay. So that there's reasonable suspicion to make a stop. Okay. You make the stop. You walk up. You smell the alcohol. You've got glazy, slurred speech, glazy eyes. Okay. There's another piece of the pie. Sir, have you been drinking? Yes, but just 2, because that's all they ever have, 2. Okay, there's another piece. So you're building this case, and the video, to your exact point, is a part of it, but by no way, shape, or form should it be the deciding factor. That has, since I've gotten here, has blown my mind.
Yeah, and maybe it's a little better now than it was, say, 3 or 4 years ago, just because of some appeal court's decisions. But again, still, the simple fact that it's anywhere in the ballpark of where it is now, it's just so different from other states, and I think is really, again, what we would say is the number one reason. And there's a lot of other issues.
Sure.
We need judges to crack down more and not let cases get continued for 2 years until eventually the law enforcement officer retires, or just to get better trained on how to adjudicate a drug to driving case, which is very confusing. We don't use technology good enough. And there's quite a few things. And really what we focused on with this last report, which we actually called Refusal to Change, one piece of the DUI problem that people don't talk about enough, and we're trying to raise the conversation, is what happens around the issues of refusals. So as you well know, when people get their driver's license, they sign something that says, if an officer ever asks me to give a breath sample, I will do it. But you are allowed to violate that agreement at the moment they actually ask you, but there's supposed to be a penalty. So what happens now is if somebody refuses, and we're now up to 42% of the people in our state refusing to give a breath sample, you get your license taken on the spot for 6 months. But we let people go the next day. They go down to the DMV, they pay a little bit of money, and they get what's called a temporary alcohol license, and their driving privileges come right back immediately again. So have we really made that? Is that really that much of a penalty if you get your your privileges right back again? So it's things like that. And here's the other crazy thing. If they refuse, but eventually they're still found guilty, which certainly can happen, they get, in terms of the penalty that they get, they are assumed to have the lowest of all the ranges of BACs. So they're actually rewarded for refusing by being assumed to be, just at the 0.08 instead of maybe the 0.15 or higher, when you would get, higher level of penalties.
Right.
So it really feels like this entire thing was set up to encourage people to refuse, and it happens a lot. And fortunately, it does affect conviction rates. Certainly, it helps the enforcement and prosecution to have that BAC reading. So again, what we would propose would make that better would be to say, if you want that temporary alcohol license to be able to drive again until your case is heard, that you have to get one of those ignition interlock devices, which in our state people associate that with called Emma's Law. And typically when we talk about those devices, we talk about people after they're convicted. But we're saying people should have to get those in order to get a temporary alcohol license. So there's actually some sort of penalty and inconvenience that comes with that refusal.
Right. Speaking with Steven Burritt, he is the regional executive director of Mothers Against Drunk Driving for North and South Carolina this morning here on Carolina Cares, just talking about some of the frustrations and some of the difficulties, the hoops that have to be jumped through by law enforcement, by prosecutors to secure the conviction. We don't speed because we don't want to get a ticket. It's enforcement through fear of penalty. And that's what's going to affect change and maybe make people think better. Now, we talked just before the show, Steven, about some of the numbers. I know a lot of people were at home this last year. There's been less cars on the road, but somehow the numbers and fatalities have gone up.
Yeah, 2020 was really a crazy year in traffic safety, and we won't know until probably about 8-9 months from now what the official drunk driving death numbers for 2020 are. But we know that overall traffic fatalities in the state actually went up compared to the prior year. And for that to happen in a year where for basically 7 to 9 weeks of the year, people were not really driving very many places, and certainly bars and restaurants were closed for a significant period of time, to think that in a year like that, traffic fatalities went up is pretty astounding. And it's not unique to South Carolina. That trend has been seen across, even though there were less people on the roads, people were driving faster, less often with their seatbelts, and more likely to be impaired than they would be in a normal year. So it's just so frustrating that if there's one year you would think we really probably drove down drunk driving numbers, it would be the year where everyone kind of stayed at home. But it looks like maybe they'll be higher. But South Carolina really is, year in and year out, unfortunately, among the nation's worst. And that's even with some decrease in our numbers. So for 2019, which is the last year we have drunk driving fatality numbers, we had 285 in our state. That puts us at 10th most in the country, and we're 23rd in population. That means we're up there with states like Michigan, which has essentially double our population. We have more drunk driving fatalities. The state of New York is 4 times our population. They have 15 million more people than we do, and we had more drunk driving fatalities than they did. We're up there with states completely way out of our range, and it just makes us realize we just have to do everything we can, and everything from enforcement and the laws and public awareness. And we're trying to approach it from all sides, but clearly we have some things we need to work on, both with drunk driving, drugs driving, and traffic safety in general, to be honest.
Sure. What's your focus this year? Any legislative focuses for this year? Of course, everyone's back in session now. What's MADD agenda this year, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say, I always have this vision of the first day of the legislative session, standing on the State House steps and unrolling the scroll of all the changes we need to make to the DUI laws and just have it like roll down the steps because there's so many things. But it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. They really only have the appetite to hear from you on one issue. So we're continuing to be focused on what we believe is our number one national priority and certainly our number one South Carolina priority, and that's to make it so that everyone that gets convicted of a drunk driving offense has to get one of those ignition interlock devices for some period of time, not the rest of their life, 6 months on a first offense, 2 years on a second offense. But that has, across the country, has been shown when states pass those laws, they have drunk driving fatality reductions an average of 16%, some well beyond that.
Wow.
We absolutely need those numbers here as bad as the situation is. So in our state, we currently have Emma's Law, which requires those ignition interlock devices, which are basically like in-car breathalyzers, where if you blow with any detectable alcohol level, your car won't start. Right now, we require them for repeat offenders and first-time offenders if their BAC was 0.15 or higher.
Okay.
What we're trying to do is get rid of that 0.15, cut off on those first offenses, and just say if you get a DUI, you're getting one of these devices. So I think the most amazing statistic about these is that since 2006 across the country, these devices have blocked 3 million plus drunk driving trips.
Holy moly.
That's how many times somebody tried to start their car and couldn't because the device would not let them. Wow. So obviously we feel like we're running up against about as much as good decision making as we can get out of people, unfortunately. These devices go the extra step of even when people make the wrong decision, they won't let you start the car.
Sure.
And so, if even a fraction of those 3 million trips caused some sort of a tragedy, and unfortunately the numbers would say it would have been much higher than that. Think about how many lives and injuries have been prevented by these devices. So you would think we'd be falling over ourselves trying to get these into more cars of those who have been convicted of this behavior. But it's a tough sell. We made good progress in the last legislative session. It passed 40-1 through the Senate in 2019, ran into some delays on the House side that we were not happy with. And then COVID came along, and the rest of those legislative days kind of got wiped away. So we have to start back over. So the new bill number is Senate Bill 28. It's basically the same bill that passed the Senate last year. So we're hoping to quickly get it through the Senate, move on to the fight in the House. Hopefully there won't be the fight we had last year, or at least not the delays. And we can finally get this life-saving technology occurring more frequently in our state.
And we have just about a minute left, what can people listening today do to help fight that fight with that Senate bill, with that House bill? Is that just call your representative, your House representative, your state senators? Is it as simple as that?
Yeah, any time to call is good, and let them know we need drunk driving reform, and these interlocks are the way to go. Again, Senate Bill 28 is the one that's going to, move. There is a companion House bill, but Senate Bill 28 is going to be the one that probably gets the movement. And then, or if they just, sign on through our website, madd.org/SC, put their email in there, they'll get those action alerts that really even tell them, okay, this is the time to call because the subcommittee meeting is going to be, in 2 days or whatever it might be. But we definitely need them to hear from people. Again, there's only, I always say 95% of our legislators are with us on this, but for the rest of them, they just need to hear from people how important it is that we do something differently. And this is the most cost-effective, research-proven, non-controversial thing we can do. So we got to start with this.
Steven Burritt, the regional executive director for North and South Carolina for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD, as we've come to know it. That website, again, is MADD. That's 2 Ds, so it's MADD.org/SC for South Carolina. I'm assuming there's a companion NC for those of you in North Carolina as well.
Correct.
My friend, I appreciate we can talk about this for a lot longer, and I'm going to have you back on the show again soon. We are out of time. I'm going to put links for everybody just on our Facebook page, Carolina Cares Radio. We'll put links to MADD and some of the stats so you can look at that. This is an important issue. We want to keep ourselves, our families safe. If it's simple as calling your representative or your senator, that's a quick 5-minute call and letting your voice be heard. That's the whole point of a democracy. They are supposed to take up what's important to us. So we'll put those links for you. This has been Carolina Cares, an iHeartRadio production here on the South Carolina Radio Network. I truly appreciate you joining us for our time. My name is Tyler Ryan. If there's any guest or a topic you'd like to hear discussed, you can drop me an email directly. It's tyler@tylerryan.com. We try to keep it simple for you, just like that. Once again, Carolina Cares, thank you so much for joining us, and I will speak with you in 7 days.